most people that you ever talk to, they don't really care about, for example, politics or even law as a loose descriptive. They think it's stupid, okay? And all of a sudden, for example, with what I call the old current worldwide events and what was being imposed relating to needles and stuff, all of a sudden, people who had no interest in politics and law tried to have this fight with politics and law. And it's amazing how what they didn't care about, they defaulted to trying to rely on. Hello, it is March 2022, and I'm going to be talking about a topic that is not directly related to, for example, whistleblowing and exposing, for example, sexual abuse, sex trafficking of vulnerable women, and police, judicial, and political corruption, although it kind of does tie in with those topics. And I've also talked extensively about social conditioning, social engineering, and social justice movements, and how people are sheeple. And that applies to people in the what we'll call the mainstream media types, as well as the alternative media types. And both are being fed two different flavors of the same narrative, and that's the trap. And it's really interesting, for example, to see how with old current worldwide events and what was being imposed, how most people, when you talk to them prior, they had no interest in politics or law, thinking that as a descriptive it was stupid, and how they ended up defaulting to going into that fight without any even knowledge or experience in either topic. And we see how that went. And it's also interesting to see how many people believe, and to believe is to make an uninformed conclusion of their success on both sides. Anyway, so it all kind of ties into the topic of this particular video. And before I continue, I just want to segue for a moment and make something clear. I've had people ask, why do I sound as a descriptive cryptid when I talk with using descriptives rather than just coming out and say things? Well, I do so to avoid any unnecessary hardships. For example, being taken down because of everything that's going on, and that's why. And even when you look, and I'm just going to segue for a moment, and I'm definitely not going to be focusing on this throughout the video, but when you look at the scripture, for example, the Bible, and how many Christians, for example, as well as atheists and stuff, they question why, especially in the New Testament, with the Son and the different authors of that, why everything was so kind of cryptic. Why didn't the Son just say things directly? Well, when you think about the type of thing that we're dealing with today, publicly speaking, and the threats that are made to be taken down and so forth, erased, and what's the other? There's another famous term that just jumped out of my head. You know, back then they had the same type of thing. So things were being said in a way to avoid unnecessary hardships and whatever else. So that's why I try to use descriptives as much as I can. And it is what it is. I mean, a lot of people, I've highlighted this as well, who want to be somebody who's you see this with the truther community, who want to be the next whatever, and they take pride with going to social media jail and everything else and being shut down, and everyone's ranting about that and whatever. If that's the badge of honor that the truther community wants to embrace, then so be it. I mean, I'm nobody to be saying anything about that, but now I'm digressing. So going back to this particular topic, and how it relates. So I've highlighted and talked about all these different things, and we see, for example, with the old current worldwide events and what was being imposed or is being imposed in some parts, great divisions around the world. Now, prior to all this, we've seen social justice movements, for example, dividing up countries, nations, cultures, and everything else. And now what's being imposed, the ruling class, whoever, whatever you want to call them, the elites, they've now scaled this up to worldwide. So now we're seeing worldwide divisions. And we see worldwide divisions, for example, with what's happening in Eastern Europe. And I'm going to be referring to Russia as the parent company and the Ukraine as the other country. And what a lot of people, and we're seeing a divide here, and even with mainstream and alternative media and independent sources, we're getting conflicts of what's going on there. Some people are even questioning if anything's going on there. There was a video of a Russian tank running over a moving vehicle. I've shown that, and what is missing on that Russian tank is a big letter Z, white one. And the Russians did that because the other country and the parent country have the same equipment. So the parent company had marked all their equipment with a big white letter Z, so there's no friendly fire and everything else. We didn't see that. So what is going on over there? There's people on the ground there giving conflicting stories of what's happening. We hear, for example, in mainstream media that the parent company, they're waiting to invade, and then we hear that, oh, well, they're already there. So which is it? Are they waiting to go in, or are they already in there and causing death and destruction and everything else? This video is not challenging any of that or even going to be addressing that. I just thought I'd highlight it for what it's worth. Now, just before I get into the meat and potatoes of this topic, I've highlighted, especially with overlays, the perceived leader of the other country, who he is. And if you start connecting the dots, you'll start to understand, for example, who he is, how he got into power and everything else. And him being a comedian, playing the role of the president of this other country and everything else. And the title of this comedy thing was what I guess you can call it predictive programming the people to accept him in winning favor just years before he became the leader. You really have to kind of wonder, like, it's not coincidences. So when you look at his ties of this other country, this perceived leader, and his connections and everything else, then you start to make more sense. Now, what this video is really, what I really want to briefly focus on, and this is someone inspired by a video from a channel who gives a really good overview of why things are happening and uses the comparison to, for example, with India and Pakistan and that history there. And I briefly mentioned, for example, the former Yugoslavia, which is now Croatia and Bosnia and other countries as well. And basically what happened there was the United States and the United Nations went in and just divided it all up. So the former Yugoslavia, all the provinces broke up into their own little independent countries and caused more harm than good, and not by chance. And we see the same thing all around the world throughout modern history with, as a descriptive, good descriptive, the busybody of the U.S. Now this, when I say the U.S. or America or whatever, or any other country, I am not talking about the people in general. The people in general, it doesn't matter what country you're from, or what culture you have, or what religions are there, or anything else. At the end of the day, people are just people. People just want to live their lives, go to work, feel productive or be productive, and, pay their bills, be with family, and spend time with friends and have good times and just live their lives. It's common around the world. This is what people are like. So when I mention the countries and stuff by name, it's not them. It's the ones that are the perceived rulers and the military complexes of these countries. That is the problem. That's the focus. And so many innocent people throughout history, whether it be ancient history, far history, or modern history, so many innocent people lose their lives because of a handful of people and their boredom. And I've talked about this in videos over the years, how in this decadent stage of civilization, boredom, and we see that on an individual level all the way up to, the worldwide level now. So what I want to do is really just explain what's happening there. I'm just going to be very brief, and I can sit here for hours. But the video that that inspired this video, I'll leave the link in the description. This individual does a very good job of highlighting and going through some history and everything else. So what's happening there is the leader of the parent company is trying to prevent a whole bunch of things that has happened, for example, with the former Yugoslavia, as well as India and Pakistan and other countries around the world. And moreover, they're trying to prevent the United Nations, also known as the United States, from literally being at their doorstep with defensive or offensive capabilities for a strike. And the proximity is so close, and I'm going to use this as a descriptive, that from that vantage point of this other country, they can pretty much see the capital of the parent company or country. And that would make anyone have some sort of concerns. And then there's other things that people have to realize, that what's happening now over there, it's been going on for a while. And this comes into the history, and again, this video sums it up very well. And I'll leave the link in the description box below, for people to watch it. But we see a lot of people accepting the vilification of the leader of the parent company or country, and people are buying into it. It always has to be a villain, and the villain's always the one that's opposing the one giving the narrative. And usually the narrative is false. And I've talked about all this before. So this all ties into with political corruptions and everything else. And you have to look at even the perceived leader of the United States right now and their connections to this other country, and the perceived leader's son, and all the scandal that went around with all that and everything else. So there's a lot more going on. And yes, there's innocent people that are being impacted. But you can't base emotions or base conclusions on emotions, because you just can't, because emotions skews perception, and then you start to cherry pick and everything else. And I've also highlighted the studies made famous by Julia Shaw extensively about implanting false memories and everything else, and all of this plays a role. Everything ties in together. You cannot isolate one or several topics and go with it. You have to combine it all to understand. So really, that's what's happening over there right now, is the parent company is trying to protect their interests, which is also the interests of this other country, and that ties into the history and everything else, and preventing an uncomfortable situation with having, for example, the United States being right at their doorstep. That would make anyone uncomfortable. So yeah, that's all I really want to say about all this and what's happening over there. And again, this ties into with the social conditioning, engineering of society. And when I say society now, I'm talking about the society of the world, the people of the world. And everyone's paying attention. And this is just another distraction to keep people worried, scared, because what's going to happen is it's going to go into full all-out, massive destruction. That wouldn't be in anyone's best interests. And what the parent company is, I'm just going to go along with the narrative, planning to do, or if they haven't done it already, it wouldn't be in their interest to cause a lot of damage to the infrastructure of the other country, because then you'd have to rebuild it. You want to try to preserve it, and we don't know what's really going on behind the scenes and what's being said and all the talks and everything else. There's a lot more going on than we don't even know a fraction. And what little we do know, is it true or not? Who knows? There's not enough information to make a properly informed conclusion. And this all ties back into injustice, wrongful or false allegations. False allegations does not only happen to individuals like myself, like Daniel Holtzclaw, like Stephen Avery. False accusations can be towards leaders, perceived leaders of countries and nations. It can also be anything in between. False accusations. So anyway, just things to think about. Check out this video and give you some good insight as to what's really going on. Hopefully some people who are on the fence, or who are accepting the official narrative by mainstream and the vilification of the parent company or country. I keep saying company because that's usually when I use that term. Hopefully this clears things up and people can make a better informed conclusion. Whatever's happening there is their business. I'm not trying to take away anything from the other country, the people there. They're just caught in the middle of whatever's going on. And Central and Eastern Europe, even Western Europe, has had their fair share of wars, and the people survived. And it's unfortunate. But the people, for example, in North America, never experienced that. Unless they had, for example, parents or grandparents that had come from those kind of, those conditions and lived through it and survived. It's just stories, but they themselves haven't experienced it. So anyway, for whatever it's worth, things to think about. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. And I do have ties with Croatia. That's where my family comes from. I was born in Canada, and I did live in Central and traveled Central and Eastern Europe when I was younger. But anyway, I digress.